Across the American Midwest, there are towns where time didn't exactly stop. It just slowed down year after year until almost everyone was gone. Drive long enough through these plains, and you'll pass places where schools closed quietly, storefronts never reopened, and entire streets now wait for people who never came back. Between 1950 and 2020, more than half of the rural counties across Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas lost at least a third of their population. The numbers are stark, but the feeling is harder to measure. Some of these towns still appear on maps, some still hold elections, and in at least one case, a single resident keeps an entire town officially alive. Tonight, we're traveling through the loneliest towns left in the Midwest, places that didn't disappear overnight, but slowly faded into silence. Number 10, Rugby, North Dakota. There is a monument at the edge of Rugby that marks, according to a 1931 survey, the geographic center of North America. It's a stone obelisk, roughly 10 feet tall, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Most days, no one is standing beside it. With a population of just under 2,700, Rugby isn't a ghost town, not technically. The courthouse still operates. A few diners still serve coffee at 7 a.m. to the same faces that showed up yesterday. But the town was built for more than twice that number. In 1930, at its peak, over 5,000 people called Rugby home. Rail lines connected it to grain markets across the region. The Northern Pacific Railroad put it on the map. Then the railroad routes shifted. Farms grew larger as families grew smaller. Between 1980 and 2020 alone, Rugby lost nearly 40% of its population. Schools consolidated, the hardware store closed, then the department store, then the movie theater. What remains is orderly and quietly proud, streets wider than the traffic they carry, parking lots rarely more than a third full, grain elevators rising above the horizon like monuments to another era. In winter, the wind moves across the plains without interruption. Snow drifts against empty sidewalks. Traffic lights change for intersections where no cars are waiting. Rugby didn't fail. It simply became smaller than it was built to be. And in the Midwest, that may be the most common story of all. Number 9. Amboy, Minnesota. At its peak in the early 1900s, Amboy had a creamery, 2 banks, a hotel, and a weekly newspaper called the Amboy Journal. Its population hovered around 800. The surrounding farmland was some of the most productive in Blue Earth County, and there was every reason to believe the town would grow. Today, fewer than 550 people live in Amboy. The 2 banks are gone, so is the hotel. The creamery closed in the 1960s when regional consolidation made small-town dairy operations obsolete. The Journal printed its last edition in 1974. What's left is a town that still functions a grain elevator, a bar, a gas station, but feels slightly oversized for the life it now holds. Main Street has gaps where buildings once stood, like missing teeth. Houses are maintained but rarely renovated. On most afternoons, the loudest sound is wind moving through the surrounding cornfields. Drive through Amboy on a Tuesday in February, and you may not see another person on the street for 20 minutes. That's not abandonment. That's something quieter and harder to name, the feeling of a place built for a future that arrived and then moved on. Number 8, McIntosh, Minnesota. McIntosh sits in Polk County in northwestern Minnesota, where the Red River Valley flattens into an almost featureless plain. The town was founded in 1887 by Scandinavian settlers, mostly Norwegian and Swedish immigrants, who came for the fertile soil and stayed for generations. By 1920, about 900 people lived here. That number is now under 600 and falling. The last school closed in 2004 when McIntosh merged its district with nearby Fertile. Children now ride a bus 40 minutes each way. The loss of a school is often the clearest signal that a small town has crossed a threshold without it. Young families have one less reason to stay. Yet, McIntosh doesn't feel defeated. There's a hardware store, a credit union, a Lutheran church that fills on Sundays. Lawns are kept neat. The local hockey rink still runs youth leagues in winter. But in the evenings, when the temperature drops below zero and the streetlights come on along a main street that's half empty, the distance between neighbors starts to feel like something more than geography. This is a town that has learned to function at a smaller scale, and the people who remain have made their peace with that. The question is, how many more rounds of shrinkage a place can survive before the math stops working? Number 7, Beatrice, Nebraska. Beatrice, pronounced B-A-T-RIS by locals, not like the name was a regional hub for much of the 20th century. At its high point in the 1960s, it had a population of over 12,000 and served as the commercial center for several surrounding counties. Downtown had department stores, a movie house, a Carnegie library, and a rail depot that handled both passengers and freight. The population today is around 12,000, nearly identical to its 1960 peak. So why does Beatrice feel smaller? Because the economy has hollowed out even as the headcount stayed flat. The department stores closed and were replaced by a Walmart on the edge of town. The rail depot is now a museum. Downtown storefronts cycle between short-lived businesses and vacant windows. The surrounding farms still exist, but they're operated by fewer people than ever. A farmer in 1960 might have employed 3 or 4 seasonal workers. Today, a single operator runs the same acreage with GPS-guided machinery. Beatrice functions. It has a hospital, a community college, a Menards, but the energy that once made it feel like a destination, a place people drove toward, not just through, has softened into something more routine. The Midwest has many towns like this. Not dying, exactly, but not quite alive in the way they once were. Number 6. Scenic, South Dakota. In 2011, the entire town of Scenic, South Dakota was listed for sale on eBay, asking price $799,000. The listing included a bar, a dance hall, a church, a jail, a house, and several outbuildings. Total population at the time of the sale, fewer than 10 people. That transaction tells you almost everything you need to know about Scenic. The town was founded in 1906 as a ranching community on the edge of the Badlands. At its modest peak, a few hundred people lived nearby, sustained by cattle ranching and travelers crossing the plains. By the 1980s, most had left. By 2011, the entire town could be sold as a single estate. A religious organization called the Igloo Church of Christ purchased it and moved in, intending to serve the surrounding Native American communities. That didn't last. By 2017, Scenic had changed hands again, this time to a South African film producer who wanted to use it as a movie set. Today, weathered storefronts face the highway. Most passing cars don't slow down. A few buildings still stand, their facades bleached to the same pale tone as the surrounding plains. Scenic isn't abandoned, it's owned. The town changes hands from time to time, surviving as a transaction rather than a community. It exists now as property more than place, and in this part of the country, that difference carries more weight than it should. Number 5. Cairo, Nebraska. In Hall County, Nebraska, there is a village called Cairo, population 771 as of the 2020 census, sitting at the intersection of 2 county roads, surrounded by center pivot irrigation systems that draw water from the Ogallala Aquifer below. Cairo was platted in 1873, named improbably after the Egyptian city, as was fashionable for ambitious frontier towns in the post-Civil War era. For a time, the ambition seemed justified. The railroad came through. A few commercial blocks formed. Schools opened. By the 1920s, Cairo had more than 1,000 residents. What's changed since then is not dramatic. No flood, no fire, no industrial collapse. Just the long arithmetic of consolidation. The Cairo School District merged with nearby Wood River in 2004. The grain elevator still operates, but is now owned by a regional cooperative headquartered in Grand Island, 30 miles away. Most residents who work drive out of town. Cairo exists, but its economic gravity has shifted elsewhere. The buildings along the main block are maintained but underused. A few businesses open irregular hours. The library is open 3 days a week. Drive through on a weekday afternoon and you'll find the streets quiet, grain trucks passing occasionally, the sound of wind through the fields, nothing broken, nothing abandoned. Just a place that has quietly become smaller than it was, adjusting to a scale its founders never planned for. Number 4. Gackle, North Dakota. In south-central North Dakota, surrounded by miles of open farmland, sits the small city of Gackle. The population today hovers around a few hundred, a fraction of what it once was in the mid-20th century. Gackle was founded in the early 1900s as a railroad and farming community. Like many towns across the Great Plains, its growth depended on wheat fields stretching toward the horizon and trains that connected rural life to distant markets. For decades, that was enough. But over time, the math changed. Farms consolidated, young residents left for larger cities, rail traffic slowed. What remained was not collapse, but contraction. Today, Gackle still functions. There is a school, a post office, a few local businesses. but the streets feel wider than necessary. Storefronts close earlier than they once did. On windy afternoons, the prairie seems louder than the town itself. Gackle is not abandoned. It is simply smaller than it was built to be. And in the upper Midwest, that quiet downsizing has become one of the region's most familiar stories. Number 3, Picher, Oklahoma. Picher did not fade. It was condemned. From the 1910s through the 1960s, Picher was the heart of the tri-state mining district, which straddled northeastern Oklahoma, southeastern Kansas, and southwestern Missouri. Lead and zinc pulled from the ground here helped manufacture ammunition during both world wars. At its height in the 1920s, Picher had a population of over 14,000. There were theaters, hotels, schools with thousands of students, and a minor league baseball team. The mines ran 24 hours a day. The mines also left behind chat piles, mountains of crushed mining waste, some over 100 feet tall, that now rise above the empty landscape like gray monuments to an industry that destroyed what it built. The lead dust settled over everything: yards, playgrounds, the interiors of houses. Decades passed before the full consequences were understood. In 1996, the EPA declared Picher part of the Tar Creek Superfund site, one of the most contaminated locations in the United States. Studies found that more than a third of local children had blood lead levels above the threshold for developmental damage. The aquifer beneath the town was contaminated. Sinkholes from collapsed mine tunnels had begun appearing in residential streets. Between 2006 and 2009, the federal government bought out most of the remaining residents and demolished their homes. A tornado in 2008 accelerated the process, killing 8 people and destroying much of what remained. By 2009, Picher's population had fallen to fewer than 20. Today, the chat piles remain too expensive to remove, too toxic to ignore. A few structures still stand at odd intervals in what is now open land. The grid of streets is still visible on satellite maps, running between empty lots where houses used to be. Picher isn't lonely the way other towns on this list are lonely. It's something closer to a wound that has been left to scar over. The silence here doesn't come from departure alone. It comes from what was done to make people leave. Number 2, Monowi, Nebraska. When Elsie Eiler's husband Rudy died in 2004, the population of Monowi, Nebraska, dropped from 2 to 1. Elsie is now the sole resident of an incorporated village. This means she serves as mayor, village clerk, and village treasurer simultaneously, all positions required by Nebraska law for an incorporated municipality. She issues herself the annual liquor license required to keep the Monowi Tavern open. She approves her own annual budget. She votes in every local election, and she always wins. Monowi was never large. Founded in 1902 by Czech and German immigrants, it reached its peak population of 150 in 1930. The same forces that emptied towns across the northern plains, farm consolidation, the end of branch rail lines, the pull of Omaha and Lincoln, worked on Monowi across the following decades. By 1980, fewer than 30 people lived there. By 2000, it was just Elsie and Rudy. The Monowi Tavern has been open for decades, serving locals from surrounding farms and the occasional curious traveler who makes the detour to see what a one-person town actually looks like. Elsie tends bar, takes orders, and keeps the lights on. When asked why she stays, she gives practical answers. The tavern is paid for, the house is paid for, she knows where everything is. Monowi is the logical endpoint of the story that Rugby and Cairo and McIntosh are all somewhere in the middle of. Most towns will not reach it. But the fact that it is possible that a legal municipality can reduce to a single person and continue to function says something about what towns are made of. Not population, not commerce. Something more stubborn than either. Number 1, Ludlow, Illinois. The loneliest town in the Midwest does not look like one. Ludlow sits in Champaign County, Illinois, in the dead center of the most productive agricultural land in the world. The roads are straight, the fields are planted in precise rows that extend to the horizon. The grain elevator at the edge of town is still operational. Nothing appears broken or abandoned. The grass is mowed. Fewer than 300 people live here. The school closed in 2003 when the district merged with Paxton. The last grocery store shut down sometime in the 2010s. The post office, technically still open, runs part-time hours. Ludlow was incorporated in 1872, laid out along the Illinois Central Railroad with the expectation that it would grow as the surrounding farmland was cultivated. For a while, it did. By 1900, nearly 600 people lived here. But the railroad became less important as roads improved, and as roads improved, people no longer needed to shop locally. A trip to Paxton or Champaign took 20 minutes instead of half a day. The logic of the small town, that distance itself was a reason to stay, dissolved. There was no disaster in Ludlow, no Superfund site, no mine collapse, no tornado. Just the steady, almost geological process of rural America redistributing itself towards cities, generation by generation, choice by choice. That is what makes Ludlow feel like the right place to end this list. It represents the most common form of Midwestern loneliness, not dramatic, not toxic, not the result of any single decision. Just the accumulation of individual decisions made by people who left for reasonable reasons and the quiet that remains for those who stayed. Across the Midwest, hundreds of towns are somewhere on this spectrum, between Rugby's gentle stillness and Picher's contaminated silence, between Cairo's careful maintenance and Buxton's near-total erasure. The census counts declining, schools consolidating, post offices reducing hours until they close. None of this is new. Rural depopulation has been documented since the 1920s. But the pace has accelerated, and the towns that remain are increasingly having to decide what they are for and who they are for when the original reasons for their existence have changed. Some will find new purposes, some will keep shrinking until only the most stubborn remain. And some, like Buxton, will leave nothing behind but a marker on a county road and the uneven ground where a community once stood. In that quiet, the story of the Midwest continues, not with disappearance, but with endurance and the particular loneliness of places that were built to last longer than they did.